Hello and welcome back to Rappin with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon and I'm looking forward to a great show today. We have with us Beverly Scott. Dr. Scott is the General Manager of the MBTA. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
And we also have our friend Bob Buckley from Reamer and Braunstein, who is the Vice President of the Middlesex 3 Coalition. Middlesex 3 is a group of civic and business leaders who have gotten together to address some of the needs of the business community in Lowell, Chelmsford, Billerica, as well as Bedford and Burlington, which is the district that I represent and that we focus in on this show. And so we're going to talk about the transportation needs of the community as it involves public transportation. Okay. You joined the MBTA. You were hired by the MBTA in December of 2012, just a few weeks before I took office as the state representative for this area. So I've noticed your enthusiasm, your hard work and enthusiasm, and I've been so impressed with that and so appreciate that from our point of view. And again, I'm just so happy to have you on.
It's an honor.
What we want to talk about then is that what I've heard a lot about from the business community in this area is that the concern is that employers are looking to get their employees, especially in the high-tech field, up from Boston, from Cambridge, from Somerville. Many of their employees don't want to move but want to work here because there's some great jobs coming in and are still here. And their problem is, how do we get them here using public transportation? Many of these folks don't have cars, don't want to have cars. And getting from Boston into Alewife isn't such a problem oftentimes. It's getting from Alewife up here, what I think Secretary Richard Davey called the last mile.
Right.
We've talked about a partnership with certain businesses so that we could get a shuttle bus or a bus up here, and there could be a cooperative type of funding.
Right.
Can you talk about what you think about that and whether that's worked in other areas?
Yes, absolutely it has. And in fact, as I was kind of taking a look, I said, well, it's very interesting because we have like a lattice work of services that are in the, I mean, so we've got certainly we've got the traditional rail services that wind up coming close, but they're not there. Then we have like the 351, the 352, the 353 is kind of our public transit, traditional public transit services. They kind of do something. Lowell's got the Lowell Transit Services, we got the public transit, the local services that we have. We got the paratransit, we've got the TMAs. So I'll tell you one thing that I would say is that I think we're ripe for is to really have a coordinated planning piece that just kind of tries to take a look at all of the assets and the services that we have, how they all connect like this, where the gaps are from a big perspective, and what can we do to do gap fillers. Because I tell you, there is kind of a lattice work of really in some instances some pretty dense services, but we're kind of all like this. And got some ideas on that because it's a whole area of mobility management, which is kind of knitting it all together. And there's literally a statewide mobility manager that we just hired, that is one of the jobs is to really help to kind of bring that bigger coordinated look to it. Now I will tell you that when you start talking about the last mile, there's no question but that there are many, many examples around the country of particularly how you have private sector that winds up coming together, literally funding services, that are very, very directed shuttle services, of small circulation services, and typically that is done with the public transit provider, but very much with transit management associations. So I'm rather remiss myself because there is a very active TMA that's in this area. It's the 128 TMA, and there is a Miss Tibbetts, and she and I have probably met in passing, but we really need to sit down together because the TMAs are absolutely invaluable, particularly when you're talking about more of the suburban cities, if you will. They can be absolutely invaluable in terms of helping to bring those resources together and going very targeted, very, very targeted, working with companies, their human resources departments, and being very, very clear about exactly what the connection services are that are needed coming from what the big provider can do, which is to carry the numbers of folks. So I would say to you a lot of examples around the country in terms of how that comes together.
I know that, Bob, I know that you've got some things to say because that's what we've talked about at Middlesex.
Right, I was going to say, Ken, When this is over, I'm going to call you
I'm
because
telling you that.
a little bit about Middlesex 3 before I
Okay.
tell you what, and Ken's been very instrumental in it, is that Middlesex 3 was started about 4 years ago, really, by the governor approaching us and saying that the communities, the local governments, the business people, and the state have to form a partnership to address these issues. Because as he would, and Secretary Bielecki was very instrumental, you always have to have skin in the game. If three parties are at the table, they all have the same interests, maybe different ways of accomplishing it, but we've had some really interesting discussions at the state level. Representative Gordon's been at all the transportation meetings. The two things we're focusing on are workforce training and transportation.
Okay.
On transportation, you made a comment, we decided at the last meeting, the first step we have to do is inventory our assets. What do we need? And once we understand what those assets are, how can we mobilize the state resources, the local resources, and coordinate them so that everyone's talking together? The second thing is, when you talk about the TMAs, I am convinced, now maybe you bring a wealth of experience, Dr. Scott, from other parts of the country, that my clients and the business community would rather, we have the same interests, we would rather pay a contribution to something that works than give it lip service and say that the TMA, a lot of permits or the MEPA process will require you to address traffic. But a lot of times no one follows up. It's in the business's interest to make traffic move, to get their employees here. And as I always say, if you're in Rome, Italy, right now, and someone says, and you're from Burlington, and someone says, where do you live? Well, Burlington and Bedford and Chelmsford are great communities, but you're likely to say Boston.
Yeah.
So let's say that that's our template. And how do we move people in this greater area so that, and I think Representative Gordon really focused on it, that people who are in Cambridge and Boston, for any number of reasons, the rent structure, whatever, want to have establishments out here, their employees are very desirous of being able to get to and from without reliance on the automobile.
I hear you. I hear you.
In addition to that, without reliance on the current bus structure the way it exists, because it takes too long, it stops. What they're looking for is some sort of a shuttle service,
Absolutely.
a private
Right.
public shuttle service.
Absolutely.
What's your experience with that?
Quite extensive, and typically what winds up happening, and you're exactly right, the business community sees absolutely what the value, but it needs to be, it's that next tier that's much more, it's much more business centric, okay? It's because we're big public transportation. Now there are things that we do and we do very, very well, but when you really start talking about getting down to the next granular level, okay, that's where I think being able to have the TMAs are absolutely invaluable. All of us working together, because we all need to be talking. I call it
Well,
a
that's-
central brain, if you
Right.
will. We all need to be coordinated and talking together. But for businesses to wind up having, I have found the TMAs to be absolutely invaluable. You literally get to the job site, to the location of the employer, talk to the employees, have survey data. What do they need to do? How do they need to move? Put all the smart stuff together. There are all kind of commuter benefits that one can wind up doing, helping with providing passes or offsetting the cost in terms of transportation that employers can do. So be not only delighted, okay, it's really part of our job and responsibility, if you will, to really try to help to bring that kind of best practices and thinking to bear. So be delighted to do it.
Well, let me ask you a question, Dr. Scott. Do you see the communication between the MBTA and other regional transportation, like Lowell? Is there any way to enhance that so that when the business community, for lack of a better term, we're a tweener. Burlington and Bedford and Billerica are tweeners. We're between major regional transportation systems, and to encourage those two systems to talk to each other and say, does it make sense, for instance, to have a regional transportation central node where people can be dropped off, and then that last couple miles, that TMA comes into play?
Well, you know what? I'm actually smiling because
Because I'm
literally-
good looking?
No, absolutely. But that, okay. But on top of that, I actually have two hats. Okay, so I'm the CEO and the general manager for the T, but I'm also the rail and transit administrator for the Commonwealth. So with that, I have the 15 RTAs that report up. One of the things that wound up happening during all the forward funding, is that now we had already been doing some work in this area, but now there's absolutely a requirement that there really wind up being a focus on coordinated service and regional transit planning. So it's kind of like this. When there are things that are happening that are just unique to you, well, that might be one thing. But when it winds up being that the services that you're providing are critical, connective, regional tissue to wind up being able to make this economy move between moving people into major activity centers, as you have major regional activity centers that are up here and even more that are coming. Those are things for which we have common interest. And when it comes to common interest, those are the assets that we have to make sure that we're taking that broader Commonwealth look on. So there are actually provisions within the legislation, within the way forward, if you will, that actually put a requirement on there for there to be coordinated planning. But some of that work had already begun.
And the other issue is if you have that communication, you enhance the reliability.
Absolutely.
And that is key. When you sit down with a business that is dependent upon bringing people here, they want to make sure that their employees can rely on the fact that they can get here on a regular, time-specific basis.
Absolutely.
And I'm convinced that if you have that communication, both at the state level and the private sector and the local communities, and how do you deploy your assets to maximize the return for everyone?
That's
It's a
right.
monumental task, I mean, we're trying to address it locally. I can only imagine what it is at the state level. But if you don't start, you never finish.
Absolutely.
One of the concerns that I've heard from people who would be using the system would be, well, okay, I can get to work at times and back, and especially with the rail system, where there's more trains traveling during the rush hour time. But what if I have to get home? What if I have a car, I can get home? Is there a mechanism with a system such as we're discussing where if someone needs to get somewhere, they can pick up the phone and say, I'm part of the system, but I need to get picked up?
Yes, and there are different models. So let me tell you, actually I worked in Rhode Island for 6 years, some years ago, and one of the programs that we wound up, it was a very similar, you find it other places. It's making sure that there's a gap filler in the case of emergencies, and so in some instances you actually wind up having services with enterprise car rental. I'm just being honest, okay? Where what winds up happening, you know what? There was a major project that wound up happening. We wound up having to stay here until 10 o'clock this evening. This is outside of what the realm of whatever. So what winds up happening is that you, as part of your network, you wind up with a menu of services that can wind up being able to fill gaps in unusual circumstances. So you kind of can bring all of that thinking to bear when you really start looking at that last mile and what it is that makes people's lives work when you got to,
Well,
when
it
you
relieves the anxiety on the employee. If you're in the
Absolutely.
midst of a major project and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know that you're going to be working late, but your ride isn't going to be there,
Absolutely.
you alleviate the tension that causes, and without speaking for the business community, because I probably say I don't know what I'm talking about, but at least if it was my office, I'd rather incur that cost. I know that I can get my employee home safely.
Absolutely.
But let me ask, I know the ride, which is a subset, right, is demand response, right?
Yes, it is.
Does and I don't know the law on it, but if there would be an ability with some of these regional transportation providers to have an on-demand service where the businesses or the users are assessed a cost for that.
Let me tell you, that's now you see you go into the next piece of the, actually there is so much work that has taken place that doesn't exist today, okay? But that is one of the models. There was actually work that was done in an Executive Order 530, and this is a little bit over a year ago, at looking at, once again, all these transportation assets, particularly all of the human and social services, the ride program vehicles that are moving, to say, how can we do this more efficiently and how can we do this more effectively, okay? So now we're getting ready to take that work the next distance, okay, which is actually to start look at how we can coordinate those services. But there are also service models that are out there that are called deviated services. So basically what winds up happening is that you have a regular route within a geographical area, say it's an 8-mile area, just for an example, okay? You know that that's going to hit certain particular time points within, certain kick points within that 8-mile radius, but then you also permit there to be some flexibility so that you can literally go off, as long as you stay within that geographic circumference, you can actually go and actually do a direct pickup, but you're going to wind up making these particular time points along your defined route. So there's all kind of different types of service models that are around this last mile, which is really a
The most
more
critical,
flexible,
right.
this more critical, and it's really these more flexible service models which get you to another kind of more local level, if you will. Oftentimes they're part of the more innovative services, if you will, that are being provided in communities. And there are models across the country where this is happening, and we can do it here.
It's a fascinating topic because
It is.
when we discuss the needs of the business community, the considerations that businesses are giving to coming to the Commonwealth and to this district, to Burlington and to Bedford, transportation is right up there.
Absolutely.
These smaller costs that sometimes get more into the media, they're tiny little costs to these companies, but how can I get my employees to work? How can I get them here on time, reliably, and give them the peace of mind to know that if the unexpected happens or they have to work late, they'll be able to get around and can accomplish that.
They're all kind of, as you were talking, I was laughing and thinking to myself, and then you can even have fun with these services by actually letting the community or the businesses become involved in the branding of them and all of that. I can think of some in different parts of the country. The bounce, and literally it's the community that got together with the business community, and they basically branded the services that they have, and they're a much more flexible, if you will, variety of service.
Well, it's refreshing to hear that you're willing to consider these innovative best practices, because one of the things that you probably run into it at the state level, I run into it at the local and business level, is people don't understand that there is a lot of noise, a chatter in the background. People are thinking about these issues, and it's really managing expectations. You know, people expect a decision. I used to always tell my children, I wish I always had a magic wand that I could wave it and make everything better instantaneously. But if you don't start asking these questions, and I hate the expression thinking outside of the box, we have to come up with something different than that, but it's refreshing to hear that you're willing to consider these issues. Because I'll be honest with you, a few years ago, many years ago, I had a situation where someone from the T, when I was asking a question about altering routes because of ridership and where I saw things developing, the response I got was, well, we don't think that way. You know?
No.
But it's obvious to me, you do think that
No.
way.
And the other part that we were talking about is that I'm going to take you up on your on the date, okay? Because the best thing for me is to be able to get out more and more in communities and to be able to see the community through the eyes of the community.
Right.
And so with the Middlesex 3, because I know of some of the development that's come and more that's planned, but I mean, it's part of I was looking at it, I said, there's numbers and numbers of projects that are on the books, and some of them where the shovel's going in the ground, because quite candidly, you're right in the metroplex,
Right.
okay? And I'm saying, and so when you start looking at employers making locational decisions more and more, so how do we wind up knitting it all together is going to be key for us.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating visit for you, because you'll see, along with the businesses that are established here, we've got Keurig coming in, we've got shopping centers coming in.
saw that.
It's a very high growth
And
area.
as Ken has explained to Ken, and he's seen it himself, in the old days, if a company were thinking about coming to a community, they would stop by that community and maybe meet the chief executive or the selectman or whatever. In today's world, someone's making a decision in a conference room in Cleveland or LA or whatever, looking at the climate. They're reading the newspapers, the clips online. They're studying the infrastructure. And if you want to be in the game, you've got to be able to say, we are being proactive. We're thinking about these issues and trying to resolve them. It's not to say it's not going to be a bumpy road, no pun intended, but it's going to take a commitment both on the state level, the local level, and the business level. But I'm convinced if we don't start, we'll never finish. And I think that the attitude, at least at the state level and many of the communities coming together, as I say, we each have our own vested interest in certain things, but, you know, if we can create a business opportunity in Burlington, while Lowell may have wanted that opportunity,
Right.
wouldn't it be great that the people in Lowell now have a place to work?
Exactly. And then
But you have to get them there.
have to get them there. And then also
That's the key.
to bring as much of, I tell people it doesn't matter whether it's a very large area, suburban area, a town. Being able to plan and have smart land use, okay? So that what winds up happening is that it's walkable, it's well lit. We think locationally in terms of, well, where are we going to wind up putting maybe that mini regional hub, transportation hub? You just scale it. It doesn't matter whether it's the Boston or whether it's Lowell or it's Burlington. We can just sit and say, well, all right, these are all this is how we want that movement to wind up taking place so that we can all integrate it and use it better. And so you scale it up or scale it down, but the smart growth principles and the land use principles all come together. And then I was looking at it, some of the demographics. I mean, wonderful communities, but like everything else, we got a lot of folks who are aging. I mean, I'm one of them, okay? We're getting close in some of the communities up here, is what you would expect, 18 to 20% in terms of folks over 65. So all of this scaling, walking, accessibility, well-lit, easy, it all comes together to make
You're
for a
absolutely
total
right. To
community.
be able to provide a place for people who have lived their whole lives in that
Thank you.
community to stay in that community
Absolutely.
and become less reliant on the automobile, but could still get around to enjoy their community.
Absolutely.
One of the responses that I get when I talk to people about the MBTA and about the new day that's dawned on the MBTA, because you've been here for the 8 months now,
Yeah.
is that they point to the history of the MBTA and they point to inefficiencies that they've seen. And they said, how are things going to change? With you here in Burlington, can you tell our viewers how have things
Oh, I
changed?
can. Let me.
Plans?
Now, this old girl. I know you see this young face. No, my kids would like laugh and say, "No, mom." But I'm telling you, 35 years in this business. I'm gonna be honest with you. 9 transit systems. Okay, I know a transit budget like I can close my eyes. And so, the first thing I knew, which was work that took place and it didn't have anything to do with Bev, when when my secretary talked to me about coming, and he was talking about transportation reform. And let me tell you what I knew when I knew it was serious. I knew it was serious because of the big hit that when you went for the medical benefits and to get rid of the platinum pension as a transit veteran, I knew that it was a serious, serious move on reform because quite candidly, a transit budget on the operating side is largely, it doesn't matter where it is largely labor and fringe. And so if you don't, how you control your labor cost, there's not enough other stuff in a transit operating budget. If you don't control your labor costs, it's not. So the foundation of reform that was put there in terms of not looking, but statutorily on the benefits. And now what we're doing over on my end, I'm just going to tell you, it's called employee availability. Okay, so I say you have to understand how every bit of time slices. Okay, and so it's every moment of time because we're time and time points. So we started up when I first got here to pull and say, what is time? How do we use the time now? How do we wind up being able to, and you got to be able to understand what it is so that you can wind up being able to manage it as effectively as possible, okay? And so we're well into it, okay? The other piece of it I will tell you is that, and it's really a great group. Now let me come back and say, there's been a lot that's been done on reform. I will tell you we will never keep it out of our eye, but I want to also say this for the employees and the people at the MBTA. I have been so truly impressed, okay? Truly, truly impressed. You have and we have some tremendous professionals, and they are not wimps. They get out there every day on a 100-year-old system, and they're doing it. Now, having said that, is there still work to be done? Yes, there is. One of the things that I have said is that I want to wind up being, I'm going to do a zero base. I'm not going to call it a zero base budget. I'm just calling it zero basing the MBTA, okay? We need to understand we've gone through periods of austerity. There have been a lot of changes that have taken place over the last 10 years, but you need to understand every single output that you have. What's your backup book? What's the baseline? What is it that drives the number of mechanics you have, the number of operators I have, the number, and to have the opportunity to be able to do that in a period where it's not just about cutting, but about honestly being able to true that up so that we're real clear about that, what drives the organization, and then also about performance metrics, okay? And it is like anathema. You have to know your numbers, okay? You got to know what's happening from a reliability standpoint, what's happening in terms of your accidents and your injuries, what's happening in terms of your safety, and you just got to drill it down. So I can tell you it's there. You just work it and you keep working and you stay focused and you keep working with your team and you keep working with it and you drill it down. But we are not, absolutely not. There's been about $500 million so far over the last 2.5, almost 3 years that's been saved on the operating cost side of the house, and we are not going to let up one bit because we know that these are public tax dollars, and we are absolutely privileged to be able to have the confidence of the public. But all we got to do is stub our toe in terms of not keeping our eyeball in terms of those tax dollars, and basically you lose credibility.
Isn't that
So
the key?
it's a key. You gotta, and you're never I'm like this. There are no God Juniors that are out there, okay? And so you said to yourself, you're always striving. Will we make mistakes? Yes, sometimes we'll make mistakes, but we're going to be transparent. We don't want to make big ones. Dust ourselves off, get in there, and try to keep doing the best that we possibly can.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity. Representative Gordon has always been a supportive of the transportation initiatives. Can I ask a commitment that you'll at least listen and be half as responsive as Representative Gordon?
I promise you.
You promise?
I promise.
I'll send you the
That's
tape.
it. Okay, I promise. That's exactly. And we're going to get out and we're going to do some. So what I will promise is that, and we got a great partner in Lowell Transit. The
Right.
RTAs are great partners.
Well, when we do our inventory of the assets, we'd love the opportunity to sit down and say, through the Middlesex 3 Coalition, this is what we see on the corridor.
Okay.
And to say, what can we do from our standpoint to assist you in making those assets responsive?
That sounds like a deal. And then I promise you that I'm going to reach out with Ms. Tibbetts, okay?
Yep.
Lowell, I mean,
We've
great
already had
partner.
discussions with them, so they're involved.
Okay.
They've been very good.
Sounds like a plan.
Right.
And one promise that we've kept is that we told you this was going to be a great show, and I thank the both of you because it was fascinating. Thank you for coming on Rappin' with the Rep. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Rappin' with the Rep.
And we want to thank the rep for being very supportive of transportation.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.